I found a weird abandoned version, B787-3, and it was a real project, by the way. Could you imagine like 757 and 787 had a baby? It's literally what I've accidentally found surfing the internet. It is for sure a weird concept, because just why? Why would you ever need a widebody which can fly only 5,000 miles? So today we will find this out. Actually, the intended range was even shorter. We are talking about a Dreamliner optimized for routes as short as 200 nautical miles. A specialized machine designed to act like a city bus, taking off and landing up to 10 times a day. This wasn't just a paper plane. It has 43 firm orders. It had a completely unique wing structure that looked nothing like the 787 we know today. And it was killed not by a crash, but by the concrete geometry of Japanese airports and the brutal physics of structural weight. In the next 15 minutes, we are going to dig into the hidden specification, the aerodynamic compromises, and the exact economic data that turned this plane into a ghost. But before we open the technical manuals, please hit this like button and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy deep engineering analysis. It helps me a lot. Now let's look at the numbers. Part 1. The anatomy of a mutant. To understand why this plane failed, we first need to understand what it actually was. Because from the outside, the fuselage of the 787-3 was identical to the standard 787-8. Same length, same composite barrel, same passenger capacity. But underneath the skin, it was a completely different animal. Let's look at the hidden numbers. The most critical difference was the MTOW, maximum takeoff weight. The standard 787-8 has an MTOW of roughly 228 tons. The 787-3, it was capped at just 165 tons. That is a 28% reduction. Why would Boeing deliberately cripple their own aircraft? Two reasons: landing fees and structural life. Airport fees are often calculated based on maximum certified weight. Airlines operating 45-minute flights would be paying long-haul prices for short hops. However, notice the MZFW, max zero fuel weight. It remained exactly the same, as 161 tons. The 787-3 could carry the exact same heavy payload of passengers and cargo as the long-range version. It just couldn't carry the fuel to get them very far. It was a tank designed to be full of people, but empty of gas. But the real engineering crime, or innovation, depending on how you look at it, was the wing. The standard Dreamliner wing is the masterpiece of aerodynamics. It spans 60.1 meters and features those iconic racked wingtips. These sweep back to reduce drag during high-speed cruise at Mach 85. They are elegant, efficient, and huge. The 787-3 wing was chopped, literally. Boeing engineers reduced the span to 51.7 meters, and because they removed those efficient ranked tips, they had to bolt on massive vertical blended winglets. Similar what you see on a 737 or 767. Now let's get into the physics. Why is a shorter wing a problem? It comes down to induced drag defined by this formula. Look at the denominator, b squared. That is your wingspan squared. Mathematically, cutting the wing from 60 meters to 52 meters theoretically increases induced drag by 25 to 30% for the same lift. This is why the 787-3 needed those vertical winglets. They weren't a stylistic choice. They were a necessary aerodynamic crutch, or fence, to stop high-pressure air from curling over the wingtip and destroying the lift efficiency entirely. So we have a heavy wide body with clipped wings, high drag and reduced fuel capacity. Why on earth did Boeing build this Frankenstein? The answer lies in the concrete geometry of two specific airports in Japan. Part 2. The Japanese trap and high cycle hull. The 787-3 wasn't designed strictly for the sky. It was designed for the ground. Specifically the concrete aprons of Tokyo Haneda and Osaka Itami. These aren't just airports. They are high-speed mass transit hubs. In Japan, domestic routes like Tokyo to Sapporo operate with high frequency of a subway line, often seeing 50 widebody flights a day. But there was a physical problem. The domestic terminals in Japan were built around ICAO Code D standards. This code limits aircraft wingspan to exactly 52 meters, the size of a Boeing 767-300 or the Airbus A300. If ANA or GAL tried to park a standard 787-8 with its 60-meter wingspan at these domestic gates, it would cause what is known as wingtip overlap. Essentially, one Dreamliner would block the gates on either side of it, creating dead zones. In an airport running at 99% capacity, losing two gates just to park one plane is an operational disaster. This is why the 787-3's wings were clipped to that magic number, 51.7 meters. It was the maximum amount of airplane you could physically fit into the parking slot. But filling into the gate was only half the battle. The mission profile was the other half. A standard long-haul aircraft flies for 12 hours, lands and resets. It performs one flight cycle per day. The 787-3 was built for high cycle operations. We are talking about flight times of 45 to 90 minutes, with turnarounds of just 30 minutes. It was expected to perform 8 to 10 takeoffs and landings every single day. This brutally accelerates wear and tear. To survive this, the 787-3 requires specific engineering changes that most people missed. First, the engines. It used the General Electric NX-1B54. Notice the number 54. This indicates a thrust rating of 53,000 pounds. The standard 787 engines produced 64 to 70,000 pounds. Boeing and General Electric deliberately derated the engines by roughly 16%. Why? Because in a high cycle environment, the enemy is hit. By limiting the max thrust via software, they lowered the turbine entry temperature, TET. This meant the internal turbine blades wouldn't melt or degrade as fast during those 10 daily takeoffs, significantly extending the engine's life between overhauls. Second, the brakes. Traditional hydraulic brakes get incredibly hot during landings and require cooling fans or long wait times before the plane can push back again. The 787 introduced electric brakes. These were a game changer for the 3 variant. They offered better thermal dissipation and allowed the aircraft to land, unload, load and taxi out again without waiting for the brakes to cool down. It was the perfect machine for the perfect niche, a wide-body shuttle bus optimized for the unique constraints of Japan. So, with the perfect design and 43 orders from ANA and JAL, why did it die? The answer lies in what engineers call the terrible teens. Part 3. The economics of failure. The 787-3 didn't fail because of a design flaw. It failed because of obesity. In the aviation history, the first batch of 787s produced, line numbers 1 through 20, are infamously known as the Terrible Teens. Due to early struggles with manufacturing carbon fiber on such a massive scale, this aircraft came off the assembly line significantly overweight. Reports indicate these early frames were between 2.3 and 6.8 metric tons heavier than their target weight. For the long-haul 787-8, this weight penalty was a nuance. It meant the airline just had to carry a little less cargo or fly significantly shorter routes. It was manageable. But for the 787-3, this was a death sentence. Remember, the 787-3 used the exact same fuselage structure. It inherited all that excess structural weight. On a 10-hour flight, the fuel efficiency of the 787's engines eventually pays off. But on a 45-minute hop, you are spending the entire flight burning fuel just to lift the heavy composite structure into the air, only to land immediately. The composite advantage completely evaporated. Let's look at the CASM, cost per available seat mile. This is the only number that matters to an airline CEO. When analysts run the numbers of a heavy 787-3 against a mature, cheap-to-buy Airbus A330-300, the 787-3 offered perhaps 8 to 10% better fuel efficiency on short routes. But its ownership, costs, the monthly lease payments, and insurance for a brand new high-tech jet were nearly 30% higher than the older Airbus. For a regional carrier, the small fuel saving could never pay the massive price tag of the plane. Then the timeline collapsed. The entire Dreamliner program was years behind schedule. Japan Airlines, one of the two key customers, entered bankruptcy protection in 2010. They needed a reliable airplanes immediately, not experimental prototypes that were overweight and years late. They realized the standard 787-8, while not optimized for their gates, was at least going to be built. They converted their orders to the long-haul version. With the Japanese anchor customers gone, Boeing looked around for other buyers. British Airways for Heathrow, United for US hubs. They all said no. The capital cost was simply too high for a short-range plane. In December 2010, Boeing quietly removed the 787-3 from its price list. The project was dead. But here is the twist. Today, 15 years later, the weight problems are fixed. The 787 is lighter, stronger, and better. So, could the 787-3 actually work now? Part 4. Revival and the what-if scenario. With the 787 program now mature and the weight issues long gone, could Boeing bring this plane back today? Technically, yes. In fact, if they built a 787-3X, today it would be a beast. We now have the technology that was considered science fiction in 2004. Folding wingtips. Instead of chopping the wing and destroying the aerodynamics, a modern 787-3 could simply fold its tips. It would have the full efficient 60-meter span in the air to save fuel, and then fold to 52 meters on the ground to fit into the tight gates at Haneda or Heathrow. It solves every problem the original had. But it will never happen. And the reason isn't technical, it is the rise of the super narrow body. Since 2010, the market has fundamentally shifted. Aircraft like the Airbus A321neo and the Boeing 737 MAX 10 have changed the mass. These are single-aisle planes that can now carry up to 240 passengers. Compare the economics. To fly a widebody 787-3 on a short route, you are dragging a massive heavy fuselage designed for 2 aisles and cargo containers that you might not even feel. To fly a 737 MAX 10 on the same route, you carry almost 80% of the same passenger load, but with a trip cost that is roughly 40% lower. The efficiency of modern narrow bodies has cannibalized the market for short-range widebodies. Unless an airport is so incredibly slot-constrained that you need to squeeze every single human possible into one departure slot, the widebody just doesn't make financial sense. The niche that the 787-3 tried to fill simply doesn't exist anymore. The Boeing 787-3 remains one of aviation's most fascinating what-ifs. It was a scalpel designed for a very specific surgery, but between the manufacturing delays, the weight penalties, and the shift in market, the patient died before the surgery could even begin. Its legacy, however, lives on. The high-cycle engines and electric brakes developed for this ghost plane are now standard on the 787-10, which ANA and United use today as the spiritual successor to the plane that never was. The 787-3 proved that in aviation you can't just fight gravity, you also have to fight the accounting department. And usually, the accountants win. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, press the like and subscribe button. Fly safe and see you in the next one.